Let's press.
Nope, just you and me.
Okay.
All right. Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to MEI's Defense Leadership Series in its 8th episode today. We're absolutely delighted to have with us Ms. Heidi Grant, the recently appointed Director of DSCA, which is the Defense Security Cooperation Agency. I'm Bilal Saab. I'm the founder and director of the Defense and Security Program at MEI and an adjunct professor at Georgetown Security Studies program. I'll have the privilege of holding this conversation with Ms. Grant for the next hour or so. Let me say a word or two, because I have to, about the Defense Leadership Series, especially for those who are not familiar with it or maybe are joining us for the first time. This is a speakers forum for current and former high-level military and defense leaders from both the United States, but also from the Middle East. We discuss some of the more important policy matters facing the two sides. And we were just so fortunate to have the series inaugurated on June 10th with a conversation with Centcom Commander General Frank McKenzie. Like I said, we've now had 7 episodes, and I am proud of every single one of them. Today, we're going to talk about a very important organization within DoD, and a very large one, and that's DSCA. And we'll, of course, tie it to the Middle East because that's what we do. And we'll discuss not just U.S. arms sales to the region, but also broader aspects of security cooperation, which happen to fall under the mandate of DSCA. Ms. Grant was kind enough to take some time off of her absolutely loaded schedule and do this engagement with us, which, if I understand correctly, Ms. Grant, this is your first public engagement with at least think tanks since assuming your new duties?
Yeah, with think tanks, this will be my first one, right?
We are so lucky, and we're so glad that you are with us. Let me briefly introduce you, please, and then we can begin our conversation. Ms. Grant was appointed as the director of DSCA in August of 2020, so not too long ago. She's SES, or I should say member of the Senior Executive Service, which means she's above the GS-15 grade and part of the executive leadership. I'm sure she's earned it. She began her career at DoD. She worked for the departments of the Navy and Air Force, the Secretary of Defense, the Joint Staff, AFRICOM, Centcom. She's a certified defense financial manager. She has extensive experience working with international partners, which I'm sure will come in handy with your job at DSCA. She ran DTSA, the Defense Technology Security Administration. She's had several policy responsibilities throughout her career. And of course, I'm not doing any justice to your resume, Heidi, because I'm only mentioning 10% of it. The rest of her impressive bio, you could check out on either our website or on DSCA's website. Heidi, I've had the pleasure of coordinating with your Middle East staff during my time, brief time in the Office of the Secretary of Defense for Policy, and now I have the absolute privilege of speaking with you on some of the issues that are of concern, not only to Americans, but also to our partners in the region. Many people, I can tell you, are looking forward to hearing you speak. I know that from the list of attendees, which is quite extensive, but also comprehensive. People from government, governments around the world, private sector, industry, research organizations, and most importantly, concerned citizens of the United States. So before we start, let me thank you for your service. Welcome you to MEI's Defense Leadership Series in its 8th episode today. Over to you.
Thank you very much. No, I appreciate this opportunity. And as you mentioned, I'm only 60 days or so in the position, and it's very humbling being in this role. I think many of you are aware that this position has been held historically by a 3-star uniformed officer, so that this administration had the confidence in me, looking at the opportunities I've had and the experience over my 30 years working for the Defense Department, 20 of those in security cooperation, to take on this role. It's humbling, and it truly is my dream job, which I hope that you'll feel that during the questions that you give me today.
Great, fantastic. Well, Heidi, tell us about you, something that we don't know. Where are you from, and what do you do during your free time?
Free time? No, I'm kidding.
I know it doesn't exist, but
Yeah.
but maybe even if it's 5 minutes.
Yeah, because I always say that we do lead based on our background, and our experiences. So that's the first thing I do like to tell my team as I take on a new role. But I'm actually from this area, from Alexandria, Virginia. I grew up in Mount Vernon.
Okay.
So our first president and commander in chief. Obviously, I'm passionate. If you're ever going to pick a leader that impacted me, it would be George Washington. And really, it fits right into the role that I have today. And one of his famous quotes that he actually spoke to the first, both houses of Congress when he became president. What he said is, to be prepared for war is the most effectual way to preserve the peace.
Mm-hmm.
So when I look at that, that's what security cooperation is. Hopefully what we're doing, building the capability capacity of our partners, is going to preserve the peace. And if not, we'll have capable partners to respond.
Yep.
So anyway, from Alexandria, Virginia, and again, 30 years DoD, as I mentioned. And what do I do in my free time? I used to be a big runner. I've actually completed 3 marathons.
Okay.
But what was kind of my turning point on spending so much time focusing on running was I was in the Pentagon on 9/11. Yep. And that really has impacted my career. Again, a turning point, and I've really focused a lot on the job since then. I still run a little bit, but not like I used to.
Copy. Okay. All right. So this new responsibility of yours at DSCA, it must, as you said yourself, it must be super exciting for you, but perhaps also a little bit challenging. Just tell us in your own words, why did you accept this job? And I know you already said it's your dream job, but tell me a little bit more.
Yeah. So, like I said, after 9/11, when I went, about a year after that, I was hired as the first civilian director at Centcom as the J8 there. And that's really where I had the eye-opening experience of, we had 65 different countries represented. There are 250 senior military representatives at Centcom. And they used to come and talk to me and say, hey, I would love to do more to be a valued partner to the US, but I don't have the equipment or I don't have the training. And this was just an informal discussion. And at that time, I didn't have the direct responsibility. I was more focused on US warfighter. But through that experience, I looked at how do I get better authorities to lift and sustain our coalition? And that's really where this drive or passion for the mission started, was at Centcom. And that was during our response in Afghanistan and Iraq during my 6 years there. From 2002 to 2008, I was serving in Centcom. And then went from there. My passion went to AFRICOM, the stand-up of AFRICOM. I felt there was a lot we needed to do there, specifically, Horn of Africa, I was concerned about at the time. And then I was selected shortly after that to be the Undersecretary of the Air Force for International Affairs. Did that for like 8 years, really focused on growing air power capability globally with our partners. And again, through that experience, and there's so much as far as workforce development that I can talk about in your questions that you might have for me in that area. But looking at how do we grow our workforce to better focus on this? How do we really get this as a priority mission area for the Department of Defense? So you can imagine how excited I am now that it's part of the National Defense Strategy.
Oh, absolutely. Yep. Well, okay. Well, why don't we just get right into it, since you've started mentioning some of that stuff. And let's just start with covering some basics, okay? Because always the assumption is with these events that our audience is non-experts, right? And they don't specialize in these issues. So just tell us and briefly describe the roles and responsibilities of DSCA, and importantly, if those have evolved over the years to an era now where we are in a great power competition.
Right. Oh, I'd love to. So one thing to walk away from is it's an incredibly diverse organization that DSCA is, and the roles and responsibilities we have to lead what I call the security cooperation enterprise. So many people know of Defense Security Cooperation Agency. When they hear the name, they think of us as foreign military sales. And I can't tell you how many times I've been called like the arms dealer. So if I get one thing out of this talk today, I'm hoping that this audience walks away understanding that we're much bigger and diverse as far as building capability capacity than being this arms dealer or for military sales. So a few things in addition to for military sales that we do is professional military education and training. We do institutional capacity building. Through advisory services. We do international legal education and training, and that includes the prevention of civilian harm and conflict. We also do humanitarian assistance, disaster relief, and then technical expertise for these systems that we sell. And I just wanted to highlight all that because when somebody asked me, well, why should I partner with the U.S. over some of the great power competition or our adversaries? Well, the reason why is because of this full spectrum capability. Other countries, they'll sell you things. They may sell it cheaper. They may sell it faster. But you get the capability and it's just sitting there on their ramp, oftentimes without the doctrine or training or anything on how to operate the system effectively, efficiently. So that's where I really believe the United States is unique, especially against great power competition countries.
Right. Okay, well, that's an extensive list. Well, now that you've identified that, tell me, what do you guys do so well? And transparently, what do you guys do less well? And related to that, I think you've already started mentioning, as you started your new job, I'm sure you've had like an all-staff meeting where you've identified what your priorities are going to be, what you really want to focus on and hone in, right? So what are those priorities? What are some of the strengths? What are some of the weaknesses?
Yeah. So the strengths, I already mentioned a little bit about how, we're strong, but we're unique in this kind of total spectrum capability. And I wanted to just talk about a couple, if I could, some success stories, just to put in perspective for the audience of how we're different than other countries and just the volume of what we're doing. I'm still working on, 2020 just finished up at the end of September for our fiscal year. So we're still working on success stories and statistics on that. But if I could tell you some of the successes we had in 19, in fiscal year 19, we managed over 14,700 cases. So for military sale cases, and the dollar amount of that was $55.4 billion for those in arms sales. And between 2017 and 19, there was a 32% increase in the amount of sales. So I'm telling that to the audience because I want to make sure they understand. People ask, oh, are we worried about this mission area? And I'm like, no, it's going to continue to grow. We're attractive globally. And I can zero in a little bit in a minute on your particular region, but we've cooperated globally with over 160 countries. This includes mobile training events where we go to them to help with the training and advising. We've hosted over 79,000 military students, which I think many of in the audience know that, that's really where we make the impact, where they're sitting side by side, with our military in a learning environment. This is also something that is unique. If you do any research, and I'll call out China on this one, they do not intermingle international students with the Chinese students. It's separate. So again, this is all about us relationship building, learning from each other in a schoolhouse environment at the earliest stages possible. And then also there's non-resident advising support that we have provided to over 55 countries. And then we're doing now these ministry advisors at the very senior level. We've deployed over 60 ministry advisors globally. So another huge success story, and dozens of international competitions. Now, if I can zero in a little bit to target this audience into Centcom, over the last 5 years, it was $99 billion in sales. And in FY19, we trained over 4,526 partner nation students just in the Centcom region. And we have approximately 60 international capacity building events with partners in the Centcom region. And these range anywhere, like I was talking before, where ranges from like international and operational law, logistics, human resource management, and strategic planning.
Right.
And just to pull the string on that a little bit, where I feel this is a success, and I'll give you an example, and I may talk about it a little bit more depending on your questions, that one area where sometimes we work when we're working with Congress,
Right.
rightfully so, and the citizens that are on here, we are concerned about human rights and civilian casualties. So part of this advising is, assisting some of these countries on rules of law and things to better protect the civilian population. And then that allows us to be able to export higher end capability to them.
Okay. Well, why don't we just dig a little bit deeper into security cooperation, since you've identified, obviously, that it is part of your mandate. The FY17 NDAA, National Defense Authorization Act, it had a bunch of security cooperation reforms, which were monumental, right? Groundbreaking. And those gave OSD, the Office of Secretary of Defense, the responsibility to set policy and to determine how to allocate resources for those security cooperation programs. That same legislation gave DSCA the responsibility for the execution, right, and the administration of those programs. Tell us, what's your view on how OSD and DSCA have implemented the law thus far?
Yeah. First, if there's any congressional staffers, leaders on this, I just want to say thank you, because this language was very, very helpful. This authorization. It really assisted the Security Cooperation Leadership Team to improve how we prioritize and how we resource and how we execute security cooperation. So it has put much more focus and attention on this than we ever had in the past. So I just want to thank my congressional colleagues for that. So that's really what the impact has been. Is it has really allowed more collaboration, integration across the Department of Defense to put these priorities in place. And then, so one of the big successes was workforce, as I mentioned before, professionalizing the security cooperation workforce. Sure. I can tell you, based on my experience, I would often travel into different embassy teams, and some of the officers we were putting into our embassy teams were just put into the embassy without any training at all in charge of security cooperation. And, it's not setting them up for success. So I could, in my mindset, I look at it that before we deploy military into a combat zone, we make sure they have weapons training, right? So set them up for success. It should be the same way with security cooperation. Before we put somebody into one of these billets where they're working security cooperation, we need to make sure they have the education, training, tools to be successful. And that's what we're doing. And we just actually celebrated our 1-year anniversary of our Defense Security Cooperation University.
Right.
Yeah, 13,000 professionals. We've seen them begin their certification process. And this enterprise, when I talk about security cooperation enterprise, part of it is just identifying like who's in the enterprise. We have identified that there are more than 20,000 Department of Defense personnel in this security cooperation enterprise. And not all of them need to be certified at like level 3. It might be level 1, but this is what we're looking at as, depending on what their roles and responsibilities are, having different levels of certification for them and being able to track that as we go along. But there's 25,000 discrete courses that we have out there, depending on the needs of each of these individuals and the workforce. And like I said, this wouldn't have been possible without really the push that we had from our congressional colleagues to make this a priority. And then the other is increased attention that we have now on this institutional capacity building. Sure. What we've done we established an Institute for Security Governance. Right. Under DSCA, which again, this has allowed a lot more attention. Another reform that we've done in international capacity building, again, an expanded role for DSCA under that area is another reform. And then, we've been working with the stakeholders as far as what we call strategy to capability. Yep. So putting together like 5-year plans to say, what is it, the capability that the partner is looking for, 5 years from now? What would they like their military to look like? And then bringing all the tools that we have, which we have a lot of awesome security cooperation tools, to be able to achieve that result. So
sometimes maybe 10 years.
yeah, I mean, it's amazing.
Right.
It's been really some great work being done through that authorization.
Right. I actually want to get back to the issue of the university and how you train personnel so that they can be deployed in various places around the world. And, let's limit it to the Middle East since it's the topic of this conversation. Do they also go, let's just say Centcom, do they also go to Centcom and then train their own officers to become better security cooperation folks, or how does that process work?
Right. So we
Are
have
the COCOMs expected also to learn this stuff?
right. So this is for both U.S. workforce and our international workforce. Okay. We have courses for both. Obviously, we're not going to require another country to get levels of certification, but they could mirror what we're doing if they'd like. But we do have, so we have in-person classes, which again, we've been curtailed a little bit because of the COVID environment right now. I know in Newport, Rhode Island, our legal studies, DILS courses, we're still accepting international students, are still coming there with all the right precautions. But some of it has slowed down a little bit as far as our mobile training teams and such. But what I was going to say, in class, we also have online courses that are available to students. So there's a catalog. If anybody wants to go to our website, it's available out there. If you just go to the Defense Security Cooperation University, you can find a catalog of courses for international students on there. But it is important that our partners understand how this works also if they want to be a foreign military sales partner, so they understand how foreign military sales process works, and then educate even their leadership as they go through there. But yeah, it's such a variety. Like I said, so many different courses at different levels. Even my leadership had the deputy undersecretary for policy is like, hey, I want to take that 101 class just to have situational awareness of more about what our business does.
Right. So help me understand this. So as Centcom, for example, comes up with these country strategies, right? And then they are now effectively obligated to integrate ICD into their plans, right? Are they getting sufficient help from those trained folks here, whether it's the university or other means, to actually do that kind of exercise?
They are. And as a matter of fact, I have some of employees that work for me at each of the GCCs to assist in some of that strategy planning. And then also the other piece of this is so I can be more responsive to the congressional oversight. Right. I want to be able to say, how are we doing, and get those assessment and metrics in there and evaluation. So my team is there, sitting side by side with the GCC planners to work this. And then the other piece of this is I talk about I call them the frontline warriors, which maybe some people are on this session, is our security cooperation officers that are in the embassy. They're there. Yeah, the SCOs, they're there on a day-to-day basis, working, getting that information on what is it that the partner is looking for. And then they can feed it to the combatant commander, they can feed it to us. And just doing a better job at integrating on what is it that they're looking for and how do we get there collectively with all the tools we have.
No, I've had the pleasure of coordinating with some of those. Well, sticking to Centcom, just more broadly, take a step back. What do you think the role of Centcom should be with respect to planning and execution of security cooperation programs? Just a broad answer so that we get that out of the way.
Yeah, so what I look at is, like I said, they're closest to this, right? And they know what is needed in their region, whether it's to have freedom of navigation in the air or the sea. What is it that the combatant commander feels they need? And the way I put it in perspective is, it might be the partner to step up so they can take care of their own country, their own security within their own borders. It may be a relationship with the country so that we can have overflight access or some sort of access. It could be a relationship because that partner, we may need them to be more of a regional security provider, and in some cases, a global security provider. So this is where we depend on the combatant commander to let us know, like, what is it? And this has to be in the mutual interest of the partner, that they would like to go beyond their borders and be a regional security provider or a global security provider. So that's where the conversation, and I look at all of this is mitigating risk. It's either deterrence or mitigating risk. So it could be a redundant capability. And an example that I give, and this is an old one from my Air Force days, is, I look at, the United States did, I believe, and my statistics might be a little bit dated now, but I think 80%, the US did 80% of the ISR, and I think it was like 70% of the airlift support in Libya operations.
Right.
So it kind of raised when I saw that, I'm like, wow, 80%. What if the US had been pulled to some other part of the world?
Mm-hmm.
Who's stepping in? What partner has that ISR and lift capability to step in? So we need to work with the combatant commander to say, like, are there capabilities that we need either redundant to the US to fill the gap for maybe to respond to humanitarian or something else where we're doing a conflict, or if there's a gap, again, that's going to be sensitive, to talk about what potential gaps we might have. But I think, things like air domain awareness, integrated missile defense. I mean, there's so many areas that I know partners, the conversations I have with a lot of our international partners, like, just tell me what you want me to do to be a valued partner. And this is where we really collectively need to know how to answer that. And I count on the combatant commander. I know that's longer than you wanted.
No, it's perfectly fine. We used to call the GCCs, in terms of security cooperation planning, like the center of gravity, right?
Right.
They know exactly, the terrain, and they know what the needs and requirements are. But I always wondered in the back of my head, like, do they play an oversized role in this? Is that fair? Or is it just exactly right?
Do they play an oversized role?
Yes.
That's the question? Absolutely not. No. I think what I'm seeing right now is there's a significant policy role in this. So we all need to remember that everything the Department of Defense does is in line with Department of State foreign policy. Department of State has the lead.
That's right.
So that's something we always need to keep in check and in mind. Yeah.
Yep, absolutely. All right, well, you mentioned Congress. Let's talk about Congress a little bit, because they do play an absolutely critical role in this entire enterprise. The existing DSCA reporting and congressional notification mechanisms seem to be a little bit more skewed towards bilateral engagements. A, because this is how we've done things, and B, let's face it, it's easier. But a lot of the issues that the Middle East faces, as you very well know, Ms. Grant, are multilateral in nature. So has there been a shift in mindset, in process, in approach within DSCA to sort of gravitate more towards multilateral approaches?
Well, I think not just DSCA, but I think I can speak for the Department of Defense as a whole, that there's much more focus on regional approaches and regional security and doing what we can, but keeping in mind, the partners have a vote, and so it works better. People always like, why don't we have like a NATO-like organization, in the Centcom region? Well, the drive that pulled them all together, NATO all together years ago, there was a common security challenge. So I think oftentimes, in order to come up with a regional approach, there needs to be a common, agreed upon security challenge, right? So, in the Centcom region, like I said, the integrated air and missile defense is one area that we're really focusing on doing more regional approach. I think there's more, again, my experience, based on, the air domain is, what can we do more regionally to work on common air domain awareness? Because it's like the enemy doesn't just stop at the border of one. So how do we do more information sharing agreements in a multilateral environment? I'm
pretty sure it happens also at sea, right? Maritime capability development, especially with Operation Sentinel now with NAVCENT?
Right, exactly. Maritime also. So I think there is much more of a focus on that. And then if I speak, I just went and did a lot of my engagements on the Hill with the staffers just to introduce myself.
Yeah.
And what I'm seeing is more of a demand from them, although the reporting and the requests for congressional notification are still going to be a bilateral, because one, unless the countries all start chipping in and, funding things together, it's going to be a bilateral notification. But
Right.
there is more of a thirst on, well, how does this fit in to what we're trying to do regionally? So there's more of a discussion and about that, which I think is very healthy, to make sure we're explaining, because we want to make sure we don't do any harm, right? You don't want to make sure as you do something bilateral, it doesn't kind of shift, the security environment.
I hear it. That's fair. That's fair. So you've mentioned the University of Security Cooperation. You mentioned the integration of the Institute for Security Governance, which I think is a brilliant idea. So obviously there's been a lot of change since the issuing of those security cooperation reforms. Just in your own view, I know you've been in the job for a few weeks, but just in your own view, how are you tracking the evolution of DSCA's role on the issue of ICB, right? Institutional capacity building, or you want to call it defense institution building. What are the main sort of, beyond the creation of the university and then integrating ISG, what are the main improvements in that space, and what would you like to do better?
Yeah, so where I'm excited about the institutional capacity building is, again, based on history, we were guilty of exporting, in some cases, high-end equipment, and they didn't have the capacity institutionally to make sure that the sustainment and the maintenance and all that was in there. So those are, now that we have this institution capacity building, that's part of it, and making sure that they know how to plan, program, budget, or they, just the whole picture of, you think about the capacity at the Ministry of Defense level or the Joint Staff level, and being able to advise at that level, so that management level is capable of sustaining and moving the, I guess, continuous progress improvement of their military forces. So this is where I think it's just incredible. But where can we be better? I still believe, my quick observation has been, there's this separation between, this capacity building versus, what the U.S. taxpayer dollars are paying for versus what the international partners paying for, and trying to bring all that together with this, how do we integrate all the great tools and all the great work people are doing towards a common goal. And that's where the department, is doing amazing. And the reason why I would say our Department of Defense right now is doing amazing and focused on this right now is because the Secretary of Defense, Esper, is demanding it. Yeah. So I was just in a meeting with him yesterday where we were briefing him on how we prioritize our work, how we're looking at, strategy to capability. So there's just much more focus. And I can tell you from my time at Centcom, things have evolved, over the years. Again, from 2002, I can tell you back then, a combatant commander didn't really ask about foreign military sales, didn't ask about this. It was joint exercise training. It was focused on that and not this total approach to building the capability capacity of a partner. So we're in an exciting time right now.
Right. So just to emphasize this point, because I think it's important. We've always had sort of a maintenance package whenever we actually sold equipment to partners. Like, just if I go buy a fridge right now, I'm going to get a warranty, and maybe if I'm lucky, I'll get a maintenance for a year or two for free, right? But what you're talking about is something dramatically different, right? It's much more comprehensive, and you've already mentioned the elements of it, whether it's human resources, the budgeting, the strategy and the planning, the capability planning, the perhaps also logistics, as you mentioned yourself. So it goes beyond what the DSCA has done for a long time, which is called, I'm sure you're familiar with it, the total approach package, right?
Right.
A total package approach. So this thing is hard. I mean, let's not kid ourselves. ICB is extremely hard, especially in a region that is not exactly super excited about it, because as you very well know, defense governance and defense reform requires a set of other reforms, right? And the Middle East is not very well known to pursuing those for various reasons, right? But you are committed to it, so that's the good news. Of course, the bad news is that just any kind of culture change, whether it's within our own system or theirs, is just going to take more than a week, obviously. But I think we are all excited that now that there's greater commitment on the part of DSCA and the department as a whole to really pursue this, because I think we've seen that this short-term approach of equipment releases that don't really come with the sustainment package have just not gotten us very far in the region and allowed us to achieve strategic outcomes. So let me pivot to one more agency in this whole enterprise, because it's one large, family that is involved, and a lot, as I used to call it, there's a lot of cooks in the kitchen, right? And everybody has a role. So, which is the State Department, okay? Help us please understand the role of the State Department in both security cooperation and also security assistance. So obviously they have their own authorities under Title 22, but there's just no way, it makes no sense logically to really separate the two, because they go hand in hand and they complement each other, especially as you do comprehensive security cooperation planning. And the COCOMs, as you very well know, use both, right, interchangeably. My question to you, Ms. Grant, are you satisfied with the level of joint planning that's going on between the two departments? I know it's a question that has gone on forever, but in terms of where we are now, in terms of these two large entities working more effectively together and doing more joint planning, are we doing a slightly better job?
Oh, I think we're doing an incredible job. I mean, I speak to my State Department colleagues every day. I mean,
Okay.
so I say that we're joined at the hip, whether we're going to OMB, whether we're going to the Hill. I mean, so we're joined at the hip. Can we do better? Absolutely. But again, when you were talking about like the systemic processes that are out there already, their planning cycle, they're on a different planning cycle than we are. So what we're trying to do is we're working with them right now to bring those planning cycles together and do a better, I don't even like the word deconflicting. I like to say, how do we better to integrate our efforts? But you're talking about State Department, but I'm just trying, even within DOD, trying to work that. I used to say, and again, we're in a good place now, but I used to say in the Air Force, I'd show up someplace and I'm like, I'm finding out that 3 other general officers were just there. I'm like, what are they doing? And we're confusing the partner. We're like, hey, do more in space, buy this, buy that. It's like we're confusing it. But I think right now that relationship with State Department, and if I can even just put another plug in from my role at DTSA, is even Commerce, Department of Commerce.
Right, exactly.
This interagency team all pulling towards security cooperation, and the U.S. being the partner of choice. It's got to be it's a team sport.
Yep.
So I don't think there's any like walls up there between our different government agencies right now.
Yep. Okay. There's one more tool that has been used increasingly, I would say, in more recent years by our partners, not just in the Middle East, but around the world, which is the direct commercial sales route, right? What's your view of that as we related to advisory services on ICB? Do you discourage it because they seem to be sort of like in the driver's seat, sort of like driving this process because they come in with their own money? Or are you perfectly happy with it? What are your views on DCS?
So I'm perfectly happy with it. And I think it depends on what type of service they're looking for. I mean, if they want to build their capacity for intelligence sharing and how to do that business, well, you probably want to go for military sales because we can go a little bit deeper with you.
That's right.
But direct commercial sales, I mean, if there's something that you feel that the private sector contractor can provide, and you don't need the unique government protected type information, that's fine. And also it depends on the capacity of the country and their knowledge of doing business If they're more mature in that and they're comfortable in negotiating directly, then that's, with a company, then I encourage it if that's the best way to go. But you were talking about security assistance, but if I can pull the thread a little bit more just to tell you what we're seeing, like even on sales,
Sure.
and maybe it's a combination on advisory services too, where there is much more of a hybrid approach going on, where sometimes somebody might buy the platform direct commercial sales, but then they would like the unique services that has to be provided under foreign military sales, the training and that sort of thing. So we're seeing and accommodating more and more of this hybrid approach to DCS.
Yep. No, you're exactly right. I mean, I'll give you one major example, which I'm sure you're tracking, which is Saudi Arabia's entire defense transformation plan. I mean, primarily it is through DCS, but I'm confident in many ways that our folks on the ground are also helping out with that. So it is a hybrid approach.
Yeah, and I can pull on that example with Saudi Arabia in particular. So we're doing a lot foreign military sales. We're doing Ministry of Defense advising. They've got 8 advisors that are foreign military sales. And then when I found out that there's a company in there also doing this, I called up the company and I'm working very closely with them to make sure, it's Team USA, where is it, what are you doing? What are we doing? And really, and I had the conversation with the Saudi leadership to make sure they're okay with me kind of orchestrating both of those together.
Yeah. Okay, so I think you'll agree with me that this is hard, requires a lot of patience, commitment, maybe not as many resources actually in terms of at least money to do ICB right, but certainly a long time patience commitment, which means that you can't do it with everybody, right? Or at least as systematically or as effectively. So there's got to be prioritization, just like everything else. I mean, you got to prioritize, right? So so you've got the NDS on one hand to tell you really what the priority regions are. Okay, check. Then within the Middle East, you still have to prioritize which countries. Okay, so as you think about ICB and how important it is to be integrated with the FMS, what are your priority countries in the region right now to pursue these kinds of activities?
Yeah, so instead of talking about what the priority countries are, I think I want to talk about first that there's only a handful in the region that we're not working with, based on foreign policy. So it's just a handful. So I do believe we have the resources to work with all of the other countries, and we're working with all of them at very different levels. Right. And, oftentimes it's depending on what the country wants to work with us. But as I mentioned before, the priority is going to be if those that have the will and the need for additional capacity to protect their own borders, to be a regional exporter is even better, and then to be a global provider is even better. So if you look at, that's where we want to put, because it's about it's not just about our U.S. security, it is about global security, and those partners that want to be part of it, it would be where we would have our focus.
Yeah. Let me ask you this. This is really a broad question. I don't think it really has to do directly to DSCA's processes and work, but do you feel like sometimes it really helps to have a partner who's poor and really sort of with little leverage in terms of what to ask for and what to buy? Because I'll give you an example just to illustrate my point. Lebanon is one of those cases where it's just obviously they're under an FMF program and also a large 333 program in terms of security cooperation. So we are essentially driving the process for them to really develop their capabilities and also to develop their capacities. I mean, the Lebanese Armed Forces have done a really good job listening to our advice and absorbing a lot of it and becoming much more capable. And there's proof of that given, what they've done in 2017 in a major fight across their borders against ISIS. So part of me tells me, when you're really with little leverage and you don't have that much money, and then the Americans really are leading this whole effort, it's really good. Then you get the other set of countries that are wealthy that come in with their own cash. And I don't want to say they drive the process, obviously, but they certainly have a say, as you said yourself. I mean, they have a vote, right? do those countries sort of present challenges in terms of really, speaking of acquisition, for example, like, or procurement, in terms of what to buy and what really they should buy, not just what they want, but what they really need?
Yeah. So something that, and I'm going to put aside whether it's a wealthy country or, a country that doesn't have the finances, but something that I've experienced is many countries want the bright, shiny object, whatever that is. So it's our role to have that discussion with them on what is it. I'm happy to get that for you, especially if you're going to go buy it from China or Russia. I'll make that possible for you if that's what you want. But if you really want to be a valued partner and be capable, we need to have that direct dialogue with them and say, you know what, your munitions store, you need more munitions. And I know nobody sees it and it's a storage and it's not sexy, but you need more munitions because the US doesn't have the stocks for you to draw down if there's an emergency, and we can't surge the production line of those munitions. So we need to have munitions, or, it might be, we need you to have, more ISR or whatever it is. We need to have that direct discussion. But I can tell you that my experience has been, we collectively as Department of Defense didn't have that strategic view, a consolidated view, that instead of, my experience was like, instead of me out there getting these countries to build the biggest, best air forces, maybe it is in our mutual global security interest that they build their maritime or their Navy. But we didn't have that before. But I think we're on that path. We're not there yet, but we're on that path where we will have something collectively as Department of Defense to have that dialogue with the partner to encourage them. They can do what they want with their next dollar, but we need to have that dialogue and be honest about where we believe they could be the most value added, either for their own country's security, their regional security, or global security.
So I can think of a few forums, and I'm sure you know all of them, where that kind of dialogue could actually take place. So whether it's the Joint Military Commission, the JMCs, or with some of the countries, like, I don't know if they're still actually happening, the Defense Resourcing Conferences, right, the DRCs. And then the multitude of bilats, like just at any opportunity where you got senior leadership sitting in one room and talking defense, I would hope that that kind of conversation would happen. Are there any other avenues or forums that you can think of where that kind of dialogue could take place?
No, I think you just hit it. It should be at every forum, and I think it is everyone's responsibility. So, as if you haven't picked up on, I really don't have kind of lanes, which can be a problem sometimes. My role, stay in your lane. Well, I'm not one of those people. To me, if it's the chief of the Air Force going and having a bilat with a minister of defense somewhere, and we want maritime capability, they should be talking about building maritime capability, even if it's the chief of the Air Force. And so this is new. It's really a culture shift. But it has to be a team sport. It's got to be the entire enterprise pulling together with a common goal towards this global security.
Yeah. Let me ask you an honest question. Do you feel like the administration's arms sales policy, the CAT policy, does it put some extra pressure on you to sell more? In many ways, I feel like the content of the policy is really not that different from previous ones. Maybe the tone is a little bit more aggressive because we live in a different era and we have an objective to, as you said yourself before, to maintain our edge and supremacy in global arms trade, right? Especially as we compete with the Chinese and the Russians. So with that emphasis, which once again is not new, do you feel like there's extra pressure on you to sell?
I don't think it's extra pressure to sell. I think it's really, again, it's allowed this integration that was needed, and to be more. And again, I'm coming from DSCA, right? So DSCA's motto is ensuring the edge. So in that role, there's a mindset of being careful about release and exportability, and but I think it's kind of a shift going, we can still release and export. Let's just figure out how we protect.
Yeah.
And I think that's where the cap, policy comes in. And let me just, one of the analogies that I give about that is, the big U.S. house, right? Or I should say more, in the Middle East, they have much larger houses. But anyway, so the big house, right? So we are looking at, through this cap policy, that there's certain people who can come in the front door and they can get access to our most valuable things, right? So because we know that they're going to protect it, they've signed agreements, all this. So we give them the key to the front door and they can have access to all our highest end technology and values. But what we're seeing happen is unwillingly, unknowingly, the adversaries coming through the side door and stealing some of that technology. And then even more blatantly, they're coming through the back door and buying up some of our US companies. And we won't let them in the front door or side door. They're buying up US companies. So I think a lot of the efforts under this administration has been, how do we lock that door? How do we look at foreign investment in the United States to make sure we keep a healthy US industrial base? And this isn't just for US. When people look at that like, oh, that's, pro US. It's not just for US, because you talk to any one of our partners, and I can tell you, they want us to remain the most lethal warfighting force in the world. They want to make sure we have a healthy industrial base so that we can continue to sustain them and the US equipment that they have. So again, I like to turn that around. It's not like pressure to buy more, it's pressure for us, just to pull together and be more focused.
Copy. Okay. I've got two more questions, Ms. Grant, since we got 8 more minutes. I know you got a hard stop. And I'll admit to you that these are primarily policy questions, capital P, but I still love to hear your views on them. We've been saying for at least 3 decades now that it is obviously in our own interest and it is a priority to enhance the capabilities of our partners so they can step up, and maybe at least in the Middle East, we can draw down and focus on other priority regions as the NDS suggests. That has been codified in almost every major strategic document of ours for a long time. So we get that. The risk sometimes is, and this has been mentioned in some of the analyses and the debate among Middle East observers, is that when there seems to be some divergence of views or perhaps even interest or goals with us and the partner, and then we're making them more capable, this might cause some problems with us, whether, for example, the issue of Yemen, for example, you got a more capable partner, but we're not really in agreement on what we're trying to do. Is that something that you have thoughts on, that you're tracking, or do you feel like, you know what, if you weigh the pros and cons, I still feel like whatever we are doing is the right way to do it, and you can't control everything?
Right. So we're always weighing the pros and cons and the risks before we transfer our technology, our services. So it has to be a constant dialogue. And as you know, I mean, there's policy changes, up and down based on behavior changes. And we like to say military to military, we remain strong. And it's because we've educated together and exercised together. But there's always going to be some level of risk of transfer. But it's our job to weigh and on that risk of what capabilities we're providing. So trying to think where I can go with this, but based on when I was at DSCA, the way the process works is we sit together when we look at whether or not to give a license to a U.S. company to export or market. It's senior people around the table from Department of Commerce, so they're looking at U.S. industry, and then it's Department of Defense, and we're looking at national security implications, and then it's Department of State looking at foreign policy implications. So I look at it's the trifecta that we're trying to balance all 3 of those areas when we make decisions.
Okay. Final question, Ms. Grant. The issue of the likely or prospective sale of the F-35 fighter jet to the UAE and perhaps others. Once again, I know this is a policy question, but I'd love to hear your views, and I think you've already hinted at, what your personal preferences might be in terms of where to invest and what capabilities to procure. But what are your views on this whole issue? Is this something you guys are working like 24/7 around the clock on this issue? I'm sure you're tracking it. Just your overall observation on this.
Well, first, I just want to say that I just applaud, this historic agreement between the Emirates and Israel, and so it's a big deal, and it's pretty exciting. And I think, growing the partnership between these key U.S. defense partners, it advances the U.S. and regional security. So that's, I just want to say that.
Yep.
And then the other part is, so now that this agreement is in place, we look at this to say, is there an increased threat in the region because of that agreement? And so we're always working with the partners to say, if there's an increased threat, what are the challenges? How can we get you the capabilities you need to address that threat? So I'll leave it at that, because I can't talk about, what we're working with different countries. I mean, I know there's been all kinds of things in the press that, I can't confirm. We're not allowed to talk about it. And I think this is important for this enterprise, all the audience to know, is out of respect for the partner, we don't talk about it until it's congressionally notified.
Exactly right.
If the partner wants to talk about it, what we're working with, that's up to them. But I, out of respect for the nations, I'm not going to talk about it.
I hear you. Ms. Grant, I know I've thrown at you all sorts of really difficult, perhaps even controversial questions, but I know you could take it. And I want to thank you on behalf of MEI for all your candidates, for all your insights. We want to wish you the best of luck. This is a very important role that you're playing. And we would like to keep the door open, whether if you want to come back to us, you want to further engage in this debate, we would love to. Congratulations once again on your new position. And once again, thank you very much for engaging with us.
Yeah, no, thank you for this opportunity and, for the robust audience. Something I will ask is, normally, if there was more time permitting, I like to ask the audience for suggestions. I can tell you I'm a change agent. I'm always looking to make the place better than how I found it, and the security cooperation enterprise. So I'm looking for ideas. So maybe the next time I meet with you, it would be you talking to me with ideas for change. I would really value that. So thank you for this opportunity.
Oh, absolutely. Certainly we'll accept that. Okay. Take care. Be safe, Ms. Grant.